Hello and welcome to our objectives video. My name is Catherine Robotham and I'm a senior project manager responsible for accreditation at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement.
Hi everyone, my name is Christy Van Horn and I'm a public health consultant who focuses on instructional design and training. And Catherine and I are excited today to join you, thank you for watching our video, to provide some really practical and helpful tips when you're writing and creating your objectives.
Thanks, Christy. Can you give us an overview of objectives and why they're vital to learning?
Sure. So we know that objectives are fundamental to articulating what is going to be learned, right? So they should articulate the activities that are going to support learning and development. We've all heard of Bloom's taxonomy, or most of us have, and these 6 levels of learning. I'm going to show an example of those in just a moment so we can have a closer look at some of those verbs. But first, I just want to give some really helpful tips. And the first is consider when you're writing objectives, what action will the learner take? What do you want them to do? The second is what learning objective, what level is appropriate? So if you're just providing knowledge or an overview of a model or a theory, that's not going to be the same as expecting the learner to actually create or develop or plan an activity, for example. And then lastly, just a quick tip that can be very helpful is putting at the front end of when you're writing your objectives, at the end of this course or session or module, the learner will be able to, and thinking about it in those terms can be extremely helpful for folks just to kind of get that ball rolling and thinking about what you want them to achieve. So Catherine, now that we've kind of got the basics down and a few tips, could you share and just explain why writing objectives is so important to the accreditation process for IHI?
Absolutely. Educational activities providing continuing education credit use learning objectives to assist prospective participants in determining whether the educational activity meets their needs, guides the sequence of achieving the desired learning, and helps to identify the intended results in terms of knowledge that aids in building competence, improving performance, and ultimately leading to improved patient outcomes. Most licensure and credentialing bodies require professionals to complete a minimum number of continuing education hours within a certain period to keep their credential current. Learners from the applicable professions use learning objectives as a factor in determining whether the content will benefit their unique needs. So objectives and descriptions should be clear about how the intended audience will benefit from their participation. So Christy, do you mind sharing a bit more about the levels of learning and some verbs that are appropriate?
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen. And, while I'm bringing this up, I just want to let folks know that this is going to be available to you. But if you have another list of Bloom's verbs somewhere, that's okay too. There are endless examples of these online and none of them are wrong. This is one I just put together for IHI staff and those applying to speak at the conferences. So here we have a couple of the lower levels of learning, right? Where you're trying to recall or comprehend something. And these verbs are pretty basic. We want them to be able to define something, to summarize, relate, paraphrase. These would be appropriate verbs for these lower levels of learning. But then once you get into planning, measuring, developing different things and programs, that's when we really want to take a look at these higher levels of learning, such as analysis, evaluate, and creating. So it is important that when you are writing your objectives, that you're actually using the correct verbs to reflect what you're teaching and what the learner will learn, going back to what Catherine said. So I'm going to stop sharing. Again, that's available to you, and you can find tons of lists of verbs online. I was telling Catherine this before, I actually keep a copy or a couple of copies of verbs on my desk, and I've been doing this for a long time. So no shame in printing it out and just having it there for you to reflect back to when it's time to write those objectives. Now, on that note, Catherine, are there some common mistakes that you see when people are writing objectives internally at IHI. Would you like to share those with us?
Yes, I can
Yeah.
the mistakes that we see into 5 categories.
Awesome.
But if these have happened to you or your team, I've even seen them occur within my own programs. So first, program objectives must use appropriate action verbs and provide measurable and actionable information, which demonstrates how offerings apply to the intended professionals included in the target audience. So as Christy mentioned, there are some verbs that are not acceptable and should never be used. These include understand, learn, know, appreciate, and believe. These verbs aren't measurable. The second common issue that I see is objectives that are written from the presenter perspective, sometimes called teaching objectives, rather than from the learner perspective, called learning objectives. They should be written to capture what the learner will learn from their participation. The third common area to watch is packing too much into a single objective. Since each will be measured individually, you should focus on a single desired action or outcome per objective. And the fourth common pitfall I see is objectives and descriptions that are not written in a manner that is not appropriate to the proficiency of the intended audience, such as beginner, intermediate, or advanced. You should consider the level of content and write your objectives to capture it appropriately. And lastly, the fifth common mistake includes planners and presenters reusing the same objectives each time a program or course is repeated. Ideally, objectives should be reviewed each time a repeat program is offered to determine relevancy, but often objectives are overlooked by the team working on a repeat offering. For activities over 1 hour and with multiple sessions, this review should include both the individual session and overall program objectives. It's perfectly acceptable, of course, to keep the existing objectives if they are still valid, but remember that learners need to be clear on what they're gaining from their participation in an activity. And I do hope that you consider these common mistakes when writing your objectives to ensure that they're strong and so you can avoid having to rewrite them.
Yeah, that was a great summary, Catherine. I just have to say, you mentioned this happens internally with IHI, but as someone who works with many organizations, this is really common across the board. We're not necessarily taught how to write objectives properly. So Catherine and I hope that this was helpful. There will be resources available to you to help you create these wonderfully written objectives going forward. And we both just want to thank you for watching this short video with us, and we hope it helps. Have a great day.
Thank you.